Hi everyone, welcome back to Box Delights. Today we are playing 1815 Scum of the Earth, the latest in the Hebs card game series from All or Nothing. 1815 Scum of the Earth culminates in the Battle of Waterloo on the 18th of June 1815, when we see the Allied forces led by the Duke of Wellington in defence against an attack from the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's forces were invading north across the French border into what is now modern-day Belgium, heading northwards towards Brussels. Their aim was to drive a wedge between the Allied forces of Britain and the Prussians. Napoleon's first victory was against Blucher's Prussians over to the east, whilst Wellington took up a defensive position along the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean, a few miles south of Brussels, just beyond the village of Waterloo. Across this great open field, Wellington's defensive line was fortified by three strategic points: Hougoumont Farm on the left, Papelotte Farm on the right, and La Haye-Sainte in the centre. Napoleon's forces continued north to face what he thought was a weaker foe, culminating in the Battle of Waterloo, a sum of 50,000 casualties and Napoleon's final defeat. Wellington's forces stood strong, Blucher's Prussians rallied, and the Allies secured victory in a now infamous battle. In 1815 Scum of the Earth, we're going to recreate this battle. You can play as the British and their allies, either as Duke of Wellington or the Prussian Prince von Blucher, or lead the French armies as Napoleon Bonaparte himself, or Michel Ney, the French marshal who attacked Wellington prior to them moving forward to the ridge at Mont Saint-Jean, enabling Napoleon to break off and move east to defeat the Prussians. If you want to play as the Prussians, you will need an expansion. 1815 Give Me Knights, which gives you a new deck to play rather than the British Allied deck. In the base game, you'll get the two sets of cards, the British Allies and the French. You won't get this playmat. This is a double-sided playmat that allows you to change the format of whether you want to play horizontally or vertically. And there's an optional expansion called the Hebs Weather deck, which was released alongside 1815, though you can add this deck into any of your Hebs games, so 1066 or 1565. I'm going to play as the British and Allies today. Sir Arthur Wellesley, the first Duke of Wellington, and we're going to take on, as a foe, Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, the rulebook sees this from the perspective of the French, so it sees Papelotte Farm over here as the right flank. So depending on whether you're setting up as the French or setting up as the Allies, Papelotte Farm will either be on the left from the British perspective or the right from the French perspective. If you're playing the French, then you'll see this as left to right this way. If you're playing as the British, then left to right this way. So just one little confusion to clear up in the rule book, though Tristan Hall has made an errata to this just to qualify that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 when you're playing as the British, but reversed when playing the French. So Chateau de Hougoumont would be seen as the left flank from the French perspective. Papelotte Farm is the left flank from the British perspective. Okay, hope that makes sense. But imagine this is the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean. These are the three farms that are fortified as a defensive line, the left and the right flank of the British. The French army are marching across uphill across this field, this muddy field, bogged down, trying to attack up this ridge and these fortified positions on their right flank. At the real battle, they did kind of a diversionary, what was meant to be a diversionary attack at Hougoumont, but it turned into a full-on assault and were ultimately routed when they tried a central assault at La Haye-Sainte. A big part of the battle were French cannons that pounded the Allies and British cavalry charges that were counterattacked with French cavalry charges, and those tactics are represented in the game through tactic cards. So when you're setting up, grab your respective decks and pull out those tactic cards. There should be 3 for each side. They were infantry squares, which were very strong defensive squares that, as the French cavalry charged, tried to encircle these squares, the infantries could defend themselves from every side and ultimately wore the French cavalry down. You have infantry lines and cavalry charge. So the cavalry charges was what did the large amount of damage, and infantry lines was where the British created a thin line of muskets where everybody in the line was able to fire. The next line would fire, the next line would fire, and then they'd repeat, as opposed to the French, who were in a mass of man behind man behind man. Only the men at the front could fire. So a dense line versus a thin, constantly firing series of infantry lines. Those are your tactics for the British. We'll place them off to the side. And then for the French, we have the same 3 tactic cards, though in the real battle they were not really, apart from cavalry charges, not really employed to the same devastating effect. All right, so those are your 3 different types of tactics. Now we're going to play solo against the AI. Our AI opponent will call the foe. So the foe starts with a big deck. We can choose a level of difficulty for the foe. We're going to go for hard difficulty, which is the 3rd level up. We'll start on game round 1. We're going to give our decks a shuffle. Now Napoleon starts with 2 additional forces in play in rows 1 and 2. Binet goes in row 2, Mouton in row 1, and they're in the middle frontier, the Haissant. I'm not going to go too deep into the rules. We've played these games before. I've shown you these games before, but we're going to play through a series of objectives from A through to G. So for Napoleon, that's when he escaped exile and obviously came back to power and marched his way to the Battle of Waterloo. Same for the British, A through G. We're going to use our forces' might and zeal to overcome these objectives and mass our forces until we reach the Battle of Waterloo, at which point we're going to try and take down 2 of the 3 frontiers to claim victory. Now, just as a comment on the game, we are seeing this from the perspective of Sir Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, the Allies, which were mainly Dutch, Belgian, German forces alongside a majority British. And the Duke of Wellington did indeed perceive his army as a hodgepodge of forces, compared to the experienced veterans of the Napoleonic army. 1815, Scum of the Earth. This is a reference by the Duke of Wellington, a famous quote, when in pursuit of a retreating French army, the British soldiers began looting a French baggage train. The French army was saved, and Wellington was furious at the discipline of the British forces. It's quite impossible for me or any other man to command a British army under the existing system, he said. We have in the service the scum of the earth as common soldiers. A now famous quote, but at the time soon forgotten, because by the end of 1813, Wellington boasted that his was the most complete machine for its numbers now existing in Europe. Wellington expected the utmost from his men, and the Scum quote reflects this anger and disappointment he felt with the British to behave as they did. Now, I must confess, like Wellington, I struggle with my army. I struggle. I've played this a few times and I do find it difficult. We are playing on hard difficulty, so you might say, well, Ricky, just set it to easy, mate. But I'm determined. And I want to show you how this game kind of plays. So although I'm showing you how to play, I'm not necessarily showing you how to play well. Another way of being defeated in this game is to lose your leader. Our leader has a health of 9 if this leader gets defeated. And it is possible. We're making our way to the Battle of Waterloo, but of course there's French forces potentially skirmishing with us, attacking us, impacting our abilities to form a defence all along the route, all the way from A through to G, so all along the journey towards the ultimate battle. So our forces can be attacking our opponent or coming under attack from our opponent all along the route, we could lose our leader even before we reach the Battle of Waterloo. But if either leader dies, then that's a victory. And also, if our deck runs out, okay, so if we run out of resources, if our deck is exhausted, then we lose the game. So we have to watch that carefully. It's more significant in the multiplayer game, and also if you're constructing your game, constructing your deck. We've got a deck of about 75 cards, but you can play a constructed variant where you only play with 50 cards, and then obviously victory by depleting the opponent's deck becomes more significant. In the solo game, our foe never loses by a depleted deck. If their deck becomes exhausted, they just recycle, shuffle it back up and start drawing again from the top. So it is a little one-sided. That's not a route for us to try and pursue in the solo game. We start by choosing which of the 3 frontiers we wish Duke of Wellington, our leader, to begin. I'm going to start at Hougoumont, I think, and we draw 6 cards. These tactics are significant. So they sit here at the side of the board, and we can trigger these at any point when we have their situation effects. And this one says, when you have 3 cavalry in one frontier, you can destroy an opposing infantry. This one says when we have infantry in a 2x2 square, and this one when we have a line of infantry. Okay, so look out for those formations. So it makes it a little more interesting where you're deploying stuff to create formations. These are in what's called the reserves. They're not out here in the 3 frontiers, in these 9 spaces that we have available to us. They're in the reserve. They're available to us, they're off to the side of the board. And we have an additional 3 spots, empty spots, in our reserves where we can play other cards. So it is a means to play cards without having them potentially coming under attack from our enemy forces. It kind of keeps them safe off to the side, and then we can bring them into one of the frontiers at a later time without having to pay their cost. We've already paid their cost to put them in reserves. So that's a new dimension that 1815 brings to the Hebs system. Now we can mulligan if we want to. I want resource generating cards, and I don't have any, so I will take a mulligan. You can do this once, just shuffle those back in, and then we have to take another hand of 6 cards and stick with it. It may end up being worse, that's the downside. But I'm looking for cards with the green wax seal, like Binet here, just to increase my spending power early on. So that's typically what I do. If I don't get any, I'll mulligan straight away. But like I say, I may end up with a worse hand, and a worse hand might be a handful of cards that I can't play, are of high value potentially. You want some low value cards to get you going and starting to get you through these objectives early on. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's see what we end up with. Okay, better. Expensive, a little bit more expensive, but I do have some resource generating cards. Awesome, okay. Right, let's go and grab some tokens as well. And we are ready to begin.